Claire had always been fascinated by antiques. There was something about the history and mystery that surrounded old objects that captivated her. Her small shop, Timeless Treasures, nestled in the heart of a quaint New England town, was a testament to her passion. Shelves were lined with vintage clocks, aged books, and delicate porcelain figurines. Each item had a story, and Claire loved imagining the lives they had touched. One rainy afternoon, as Claire was sorting through a box of items she had recently acquired at an estate sale, she found a small, intricately detailed doll. It was made of porcelain, with lifelike glass eyes and real human hair. The doll wore a faded Victorian dress, its lace trim yellowed with age. There was an unsettling quality to the doll's expression, as if it were hiding a secret. Claire examined the doll more closely. It had a name carefully stitched into the hem of its dress, Annabelle. She shivered involuntarily. There was something about the doll that made her uneasy, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Shaking off her discomfort, she placed Annabelle on a high shelf behind the counter. As the days passed, strange things began to happen in the shop. Items would be out of place, and sometimes Claire would find things she knew she had put away lying in the middle of the floor. At first, she dismissed it as her own forgetfulness. But one night, as she was closing up, she heard a faint giggle. Claire froze. The sound had come from the direction of the doll. Heart pounding, she approached Annabelle. The doll's expression seemed to have changed, its smile wider, its eyes more intense. Claire shook her head, trying to dispel the creeping dread. "It's just a doll," she told herself. But the occurrences continued. Customers started to comment on the strange atmosphere in the shop. One woman even claimed to have seen the doll move out of the corner of her eye. Claire tried to laugh it off, but she couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Determined to get to the bottom of it, she decided to do some research on Annabelle. Claire spent hours poring over old records and documents. She finally uncovered the story of Annabelle. The doll had belonged to a little girl named Lydia Winters, who had lived in the town over a century ago. Lydia had died under mysterious circumstances, and local legend had it that her spirit was trapped in the doll. Intrigued and frightened, Claire reached out to a local historian, Mrs. Hawthorne, who had a reputation for her knowledge of the town's darker history. Mrs. Hawthorne agreed to meet with Claire the following evening. The next day, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Claire closed the shop early and prepared for Mrs. Hawthorne's visit. The elderly woman arrived promptly, her presence exuding an air of wisdom and authority. She was a petite figure with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through to one's soul. Mrs. Hawthorne examined Annabelle carefully, her expression grim. "This doll is indeed cursed," she said finally. "Lydia's spirit is trapped within it, unable to find peace. You must rid yourself of it, Claire. It's dangerous." Claire felt a chill run down her spine. "But how? How do I get rid of it?" "There are rituals," Mrs. Hawthorne replied. "But they are not to be taken lightly. We will need to perform a cleansing ceremony to free Lydia's spirit." That night, the two women prepared for the ritual. Mrs. Hawthorne brought a bundle of sage, candles, and a small vial of holy water. They set up in the shop, creating a circle of protection around the doll. The atmosphere grew heavy, charged with a strange energy. As they began the ritual, the temperature in the shop seemed to drop. The flames of the candles flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Mrs. Hawthorne chanted ancient words, her voice steady and commanding. Suddenly, a powerful force knocked Claire off her feet. The doll's eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and a chilling wind swept through the shop. Claire could hear Lydia's laughter, but it was twisted, filled with anger and pain. Mrs. Hawthorne continued to chant, her voice rising above the chaos. The candles' flames grew brighter, their light pushing back the darkness. With a final, desperate cry, the doll shattered, pieces of porcelain flying in all directions. The wind ceased, and an eerie silence settled over the shop. Claire and Mrs. Hawthorne sat in the aftermath, breathing heavily. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by a sense of calm. "It's done," Mrs. Hawthorne said, her voice weary but relieved. "Lydia's spirit is free." Claire looked at the remains of the doll, a mixture of relief and sorrow washing over her. "Thank you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." Mrs. Hawthorne nodded. "Be careful in the future, Claire. Some things are best left undisturbed." The shop returned to its peaceful state, the strange occurrences ceasing. Claire felt a newfound respect for the power of the past and the objects that carried its weight. She continued to collect antiques, but she was more cautious, more aware of the stories and spirits that might linger within them. However, the tale of the cursed doll spread through the town, becoming a local legend. People would visit timeless treasures not just for the antiques, but to hear the story of Annabelle and the brave woman who had freed her spirit. Claire embraced the tale, using it as a reminder of the importance of respecting history and the mysteries it held. Life returned to normal, but Claire could never forget the night she had faced the darkness within Annabelle. It was a lesson she carried with her, a reminder that some stories were more than just tales, they were echoes of the past, demanding to be heard and understood. Months passed, and timeless treasures thrived. Claire had almost put the incident with Annabelle behind her when a package arrived at the shop. It had no return address, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. With a sense of unease, she opened it. Inside was a small, exquisitely crafted porcelain doll. Its eyes were a vivid blue, and it wore a delicate lace dress. There was a note tucked inside, "For your collection. May it bring you joy." Claire's heart raced as she stared at the doll. It was beautiful, but there was something about its eyes, something hauntingly familiar. She placed the doll on a shelf, but couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. That night, as she locked up the shop, Claire heard a faint giggle. She turned, her eyes landing on the new doll. Its expression seemed to have changed, its smile wider, its eyes more intense. Claire shivered, a sense of dread settling over her. She knew then that some stories never truly ended. They lingered, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And as she stood there, the echoes of the past whispering around her, Claire realized that her encounter with the supernatural was far from over.